Now, as I'm sure you know, it's the Oscars tonight, and several films in contention contain a fair amount of violence, including the thriller Eastern Promises. So are modern-day films containing too much violence? Are they too sexually explicit? That's certainly the view of one of our local MPs. Julian Brazier believes that the British Board of Film Classification is allowing us to see too much sex and violence. He wants MPs and Parliament to have more of a say in what we can and can't watch.
Horror movies have, of course, been around for decades, since the days of black and white. But are modern-day cinema-goers being subjected to too much sex and violence? The phrase video nasty was first coined back in the 1980s. It was used to describe movies like Chainsaw Massacre, The Evil Dead and Driller Killer. But now the Canterbury MP Julian Brazier believes that film censors are allowing far too much violence and sex into films that are going on general release.
We face a rising tide of violence in the country, and my bill aims to shake up the British Board for Film Classification, which is responsible for videos and DVDs in this country, for monitoring them, and make it more accountable to Parliament. The BBFC is answerable to nobody, and their appeals committee is appointed by the President of the BBFC. I want to see an independent appeals committee, a panel of members of the public, and I want people to be able to appeal against the BBFC's decisions, not just the industry, as is the case at the moment.
The BBFC wouldn't be interviewed, but in a statement they said that their current guidelines are the result of public consultation, based on the views of 11,000 people from around the UK, and reflect public opinion. Mr Brazier wants to give MPs the right to choose the main members of the British Board of Film Classification. He then wants those MPs to have the right to overrule any decision made by the board. He believes there's a clear link between sex and violence in movies and the way that people behave, a view not shared by everyone.
It would be like saying we must ban car adverts because cars can go fast and irresponsible people will drive them too fast. I don't think you prohibit everything because some people with problems of their own, violent inclinations of their own, may watch something that they then copy. And I don't think it's the films as such that cause violence. I think, on the other hand, if you look at the backgrounds that young people who get drifted into criminality come from, their families, their schooling, their lack of opportunities, their lack of skills and social skills, they may well be drawn to violent films as a consequence of where they're coming from, where their lives are at.
Open the door!
Thousands of people do watch horror films quite happily. Movies like Jack Frost, an everyday story of a walking, talking and murdering snowman.
Neil is making him burn. What did you put in those on?
It's not doing most of us any harm at all, so should the government really get involved in film censorship? Not according to one of the country's leading film critics.
You don't want politicians deciding what we should or shouldn't see, basically. And I don't see that it's a power that should really be in their hands. They have a tendency to knee-jerk react to public opinion, and those who want things banned tend to be a lot more vocal than those who want things to be seen. And I think therefore it's not something that should be in politicians' hands.
Of course, film classification can work both ways. Margate artist Tracy Emin withdrew her first feature film from cinematic release, annoyed that it was given an 18 certificate when she wanted 15-year-olds to see it. And the BBFC admit they've recently received complaints about the classification of the new Johnny Depp movie Sweeney Todd from people wanting it to have a lower classification.
Well, I've come home to find you waiting.
If the diary should find its way to the police.
Okay, boss.
One film that Julian Brazier believes is too violent is Eastern Promises. the latest offering from acclaimed director David Cronenberg.
Well, that's an example of extreme violence, eyes being gouged out, for example. It was described, the last president of the British Board of Film Classification, Andreas Whittam-Smith, has said that he thinks that standards have dropped since he was president, and gave it as an example of the sort of thing that he would have wanted to cut.
There's shocking violence in it, but I think it's a great, great movie, and I think people should have the chance to go out there and see it. I mean, there's an age limit in place. That's up to studios, that's up to cinemas, that's up to parents to enforce, but it's certainly not something that the government should be legislating on. It's a really good film. I highly recommend it, frankly, and I don't think that the violence should stop you.
Now, it would seem very unlikely that Julian Brazier's private members' bill does get onto the statute books, but if there's one thing that every good horror movie has in common, it's a twist at the end, so who knows? So, do we need more censorship? Here to discuss that issue with me is John Beyer from the Ashford Group, Mediawatch UK. John, as adults, shouldn't we really be able to watch what we want, and we don't really want the government telling us what we can and can't
Well,
watch?
I think you've got a bit of a misunderstanding there about what Julian Brazier is actually trying to do. He's not trying to impose government censorship. What he's trying to do is to make the British Board of Film Classification accountable to Parliament. At the moment, it's not accountable to anybody, as he said in the clip. We mustn't ever forget either that the board is set up by the film industry way back in 1912. It's funded by the film industry through the fees that are made charged for classifying films. And I do think that this is a long overdue reform where the whole culture that the British Board of Film Classification is bringing about, this change of culture to a more violent culture, I think that has to be accountable to somebody.
But if they're accountable to MPs, are MPs the best people for that? Are they in touch with public opinion?
No,
some people would say they're the most out-of-touch group in the country.
Well, maybe they are, but the fact is that he wants to make the board accountable to the Home Affairs Select Committee, which is not the whole of Parliament, and I think that where they have a controversial judgment that they've made about something which is really violent, and some of the films that were mentioned there, but I mean other films like Natural Born Killers, for example, which was released 10 years ago, you know, caused a whole lot of controversy in the, way back then. And of course there was a case in America where somebody was shot up by somebody who had been watching that film. So, you know, some of the things in your clip, for example, that there's not much evidence that there is any connection or causal connection. I think that if you look for the evidence, there's plenty there. There's a lot of research been done in America and in other countries.
It's a minority of people. Why should a small minority who may go out and commit violence after seeing a horror movie, why should they spoil it for the millions of people, the large percentage, maybe 99.9% of people who watch horror films and just enjoy them?
We've got a problem of violence in our society. We all know about the gun crime, the knife crime. We've got a problem about communications. We all know about all the swearing and obscene language that we hear in our culture now. And I think a lot of that started in films. And, you know, for that reason, I think, you know, we have to make the board accountable to the public.
You say about being accountable to the public. The board say that they draw up their guidelines after speaking to 11,000 members of the public. Surely they are more in touch with what the public want to see than a group of MPs.
I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I mean, I don't know whether you've ever been up to Soho Square where they operate. But I mean, I know that they had some public meetings. I know that they were packed with people who supported the board. I went to one of these meetings in London, and some of the other meetings were attended by 15 or 20 people in Bristol and Glasgow and Birmingham. So, you know, to say that the board is more in touch, I'm not sure that's entirely true. What they are in touch with, however, are the filmmakers who demand, you know, a certain classification for their film. And they expect the board to cave in all the time, and I think the fact is that they have caved in rather too often, and that's why I think that Julian Brazier has got a point, and I support the bill.
Okay, John, fascinating stuff, and keep your emails and texts coming in. We've had plenty already, and we'll read some out hopefully later in the programme. I'm going to have to leave it there because I just want to quickly read some emails up before we go on censorship. Peter says censorship is so often the enemy of truth. This one from Gareth says that we must stop legislation based on the feelings of the families of victims, and this one says unless they can show clear and strong and credible evidence that the viewing of any material by adults causes actual harm, then they should have no right to interfere. That's it. I'm off home to watch Tottenham win the Carling Cup. Enjoy what's left of your weekend, unless of course you happen to be a Chelsea supporter. Bye bye.